When I went to Argentina last year, I wasn't sure if I wanted to live in Buenos Aires or another city. The problem was I couldn't find a ton of information, especially anything comparing the main cities of Argentina. So in this video, I'm going to give you exactly what I was looking for last year by comparing 5 main cities in Argentina: Buenos Aires, Cordoba, Mendoza, Salta, and Bariloche. Within talking about each of these 5 cities, I'm going to break it down further into categories. So I'll be talking about the overall vibe and feel of the city, basic info, housing, prices, food, social life, and nightlife. Alright, let's start with Buenos Aires, the capital city and the biggest city of all of Argentina. There are about 3 million people in the center of Buenos Aires, and then if you extend out to some of the further neighborhoods, about 15 million people. So this is a massive city. Buenos Aires can be referred to by several names. People call it Baires, Buenos Aires Baires, Caba, which is Ciudad Autónoma de Buenos Aires. It's also known as La Ciudad de la Furia, City of Fury. Buenos Aires is a massive cosmopolitan city, so of course safety is something you'll probably be thinking about. Now, in general, I don't think of Buenos Aires as an unsafe city, but things do happen. I, for example, got my phone stolen right out of my hand. So petty crime is absolutely something that you need to think about and be safe about, but you don't have to necessarily obsess about. Just be aware of where you have your phone and your wallet at all times. And Buenos Aires is a city. You're gonna feel like it's pretty chaotic at times. There's gonna be traffic, there's gonna be car honks, it's gonna be loud and noisy, there's construction. That said, Buenos Aires is also an amazing city, like my favorite city in the entire world. There's a ton of international food, not just Argentinian food. There are a ton of foreigners from all over the world. The locals are amazing, they're friendly, and if you don't speak Spanish, a lot of people in Buenos Aires, known as porteños, do speak English. If you're looking for accommodation in Buenos Aires, I did make a video about that, so you can click on this here. In general, housing in Buenos Aires is the most expensive out of any other place in the country. If you're staying short term, like 2 weeks or less, you might be more interested in doing something like Airbnb just because it's a lot more convenient. You can try other options, but basically it's like this: less effort, more convenience, more money. A lot more effort, less convenience, less money. So you have to think what you value here. For prices in general in Buenos Aires, things like goods and services are really quite affordable. Food as well. So even though you may be paying more money for accommodation, you can make up those costs by eating cheaply, getting things done at a much lower price. For example, in Buenos Aires, you can easily get a steak and a glass of wine for less than $10. You can get a gel manicure for around $7. You can get laser hair removal as well for around the same price, anywhere from $6 to $12, $15, usually less than $20, depending on which area of the body that you want to do. A standard dinner in the evening might be between 2,500 to 3,500 pesos, depending on where you're going. I usually spend anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000 pesos per week on groceries, which is around $20, $25. You can expect a craft beer for around 600 pesos, around $2, and you can often find happy hour specials as well. Food in Buenos Aires. Of course, you can find all of the traditional food like parrilla, asado, alfajores, empanadas, everything in Buenos Aires. There's tons of those places all over, obviously. That said, it's the best city in the entire country to find a variety of international foods. It's a bit harder to find more obscure cuisines like Georgian or Mongolian, but the most popular types of international cuisine you can find there, so you won't ever really get tired of eating just Argentinian food, for example. There are now a ton of vegan and vegetarian options. I actually have a thatch guide for vegan and vegetarian restaurants, and I'll link that below, but there are so many more vegetarian and vegan options now than there were 5, 10, 15 years ago. The social life in Buenos Aires is absolutely the strongest of any other city that I visited in Argentina. I suggest joining the Facebook group called Buenos Aires Expat Hub. You'll find a ton of information there, including different WhatsApp groups for so many activities. There are endless opportunities for making friends in Buenos Aires every single day of the week. Buenos Aires has the best nightlife of any other city in Argentina. There are a ton of things to do, and the main neighborhoods for going out are Palermo, Soho, and San Telmo. I actually have a ton of neighborhood guides on my blog, which I'm gonna link below. So if you want more information on very specific places to go, click on my blog to find that. The next city is Cordoba, Argentina's second biggest city with about 1.5 million people. Cordoba is the capital of the Cordoba province, which is surrounded by tons of mountains. So a lot of people choose to live in Cordoba because just 30 minutes away you have Carlos Paz, you have Villa Allende, tons of places for mountains, rivers, and nature. I spent about 3 months in Cordoba and I really liked it. It has that big city feel like Buenos Aires has. I mean, it doesn't feel anywhere near as big as Buenos Aires, but it still feels very much city. It has all the city conveniences, supermarkets, restaurants, cafes, shops, everything that you need to find is there in Cordoba. It just feels less overwhelming than Buenos Aires. Like in Buenos Aires, people in Cordoba constantly will tell you, oh, be careful with your phone, hide it. And while it's definitely possible that your phone can get stolen in Cordoba as it can in Buenos Aires, I just personally felt a lot safer in Cordoba. The Cordobeses, the people from Cordoba, are known to be really gregarious, funny, always making jokes, and everyone in the country tends to make fun of their accent. Being a non-native speaker, I can't hear it as much, but people really like the Cordoban accent. I made a lot of local friends in Cordoba and I really, really liked it there. Housing in Cordoba. So in the 3 months that I spent in Cordoba, I was in one apartment, which I found through Mercado Libre, and I paid the equivalent of about 240 pesos, which is so much better than what you can find for a 1-bedroom in Buenos Aires. If you want the information of the landlord for this apartment, send me a DM on Instagram and I'll give you that information. It seems to me that the 5 most popular neighborhoods in Cordoba are Alberdi, Güemes, Nueva Cordoba, Cerro de las Rosas, and General Paz. Cerro de las Rosas is a neighborhood that's a bit more family-oriented. It feels very residential and it's farther outside of the city center. So Cordoba is known for being a university city. I would say the majority of those students are concentrated in Nueva Cordoba. There's a ton of bars and restaurants and cafes in the area, and the general age is very, very young. Another area where people live is Güemes, which there's a ton of places to go out, restaurants, bars there, pretty cool place to live. And then the last one would be General Paz, which is a bit further out of the city center, but not far. It has a very chill vibe, but it doesn't feel quite as young as the rest of the other neighborhoods do. So the prices in Cordoba, I would say, are very similar for goods, services, and food as in Buenos Aires. The prices might be slightly less in Cordoba than Buenos Aires, but really not enough to say oh, they're drastically cheaper. I got gel manicures for around 2,200 pesos. I also got laser hair removal in Cordoba, which I found to be a lot more affordable than in Buenos Aires. For what I got in Buenos Aires for around 4,000 pesos, I was getting in Cordoba for about half that. Now, for the food in Cordoba, there are some international options. There's definitely not as many as Buenos Aires, and they're not as good. The Thai restaurant Kosan is pretty decent, actually. The Indian restaurant in Güemes, not good, don't go there. Most of the Chinese restaurants that I went to in the Alberti neighborhood, also not good, don't recommend. So I'll be honest, in those 3 months I spent in Cordoba, I often felt like I was really sick of the cuisine, and I cooked at home a lot because I just reached a point where I was like, I can't eat any more empanadas or locro or parrilla. I'm done. So the social life in Cordoba. I already had one Argentinian friend, which is why I went to Cordoba, so he opened his whole social group to me, and so I made friends that way. They were all super friendly, cool, really cool people. When I tried making friends with foreigners, it was a lot more difficult. The Facebook group for Cordoba is active, but more for general questions and less for social aspects. I even tried to create a WhatsApp group for people in Cordoba, and it just didn't go anywhere. I would say is anyone up for a drink tonight? No response. I had one foreign friend in Cordoba, but other than that, it was really hard to get connected with the foreign community in my personal experience. Maybe if you stay there longer, you will have more luck, but I felt, especially compared to Buenos Aires, there was really not much going on. So the nightlife in Cordoba, yes, it exists, and it's pretty good. I mean, the general population is young because there's so many students, and because of that, there's so many places to go out. The main neighborhoods for going out would be Nueva Cordoba and Güemes. The main street in the Güemes neighborhood is called Belgrano, and there are a ton of restaurants, bars, cafes, everything on that street, so that's a great place to get started to meet people. Also, Cordoba is known for a musical style called cuarteto. So it's really common for young people to go out to cuarteto clubs to dance to this kind of cuarteto music. And of course, keep in mind, I have so much information in my blog that's linked below. So if you want to know more about these areas, these cities, these neighborhoods, these specific places to go out, click in that blog post below so you can find specific information. The third city that I'm going to talk about is Mendoza, which is one of my favorite cities in Argentina. It's still a city, so it has all the conveniences that you need, supermarkets, Western Union, bakes, but I felt like it was such a fresh breath of air because it wasn't noisy or chaotic or busy like Buenos Aires or even like Cordoba. I was really relieved when there weren't car honks everywhere. It's a very clean city. It's a very calm city. There are a ton of parks and plazas and walking streets. I really liked Mendoza, and I could definitely see myself living there in the future. I also felt much more relaxed being in Mendoza, and I didn't feel that need to constantly be checking for my phone or my wallet like I feel paranoid in Buenos Aires. You can find Mendoza on the very west side of Argentina at the base of the Andes Mountains, very close to the border with Chile. The population of Mendoza is around 1,225,000, so you can definitely notice that in the difference between Mendoza, Cordoba, Buenos Aires, because it does just feel so much calmer. And the one thing I really liked about Mendoza is that it's really similar weather-wise to where I'm from originally, Colorado. There are 300 sunny days a year, and it doesn't really get humid like it does in other parts of Argentina. It's pretty dry weather, so the summer doesn't feel intolerable and sticky, and the winter doesn't feel too cold. Mendoza is also a super walkable city, so it doesn't feel overwhelming. You can easily get from one side of the city to the other walking, or there are tons of city buses, and in Mendoza they use the same SUBE card as they do in Buenos Aires. And similar to Cordoba, just about 30 minutes outside of Mendoza, you can easily find tons of hiking and nature places. Mendoza is also one of the most famous wine regions of Argentina. So just south of the city in Maipú and Luján de Cuyo, you can find a ton of wineries. You can stay at the wineries, you can do wine tours, you can do a bike and wine tour. One of my favorite things to do outside of the city of Mendoza was go to the Cafayate thermal baths. I have a whole video on that if you want to see that. It's a full day of relaxing. Housing in Mendoza is much more affordable than Buenos Aires. Now, if you're staying short term, like 2 weeks or less, it will be harder to find something a bit more affordable. But if you're planning on staying long term, you can definitely find good deals. I have a local friend from Mendoza, and he told me he pays the equivalent of about $170 for a 3-bedroom apartment. So if you're willing to put in the work, talk to people, go to inmobiliarias, you can find something very affordable. This would be a great place to save money if you want to be in Argentina. I do have one suggestion though. If you stay long term or even short term in Mendoza, do not stay near the Calle Aristides, Villanueva, because it's the party central and you will not sleep. It's so loud all the time. General prices in Mendoza are pretty similar to Cordoba and Buenos Aires, but a bit less, a bit more affordable. For example, if a coffee is 400 pesos in Buenos Aires, it's maybe 300 or 350 in Mendoza. I did notice food to be a bit more affordable. Not drastically, but enough to notice. Services were pretty much similar. A gel manicure that I get in every city was around 2,200 pesos, so very similar to the rest of the cities. Food in Mendoza. So essentially, starting with Buenos Aires, then Cordoba, then Mendoza, we are just losing food options. There are some international restaurants, but not on the scale that Buenos Aires has. On Aristides, Villanueva, that area for going out, it's lined with restaurants. There are a ton of restaurants, but they're all a pretty similar variety. They have pretty similar lunch specials. So you can mix it up and go to different places, but it's essentially the same thing at every place. There were a lot of really cute cafes around Mendoza though, which I really liked. So social life in Mendoza. The Facebook group for Mendoza for expats does seem to be pretty involved, and also Also, during the 2 weeks that I was there, I noticed that there were a ton of meetup groups with foreigners and locals alike. I did end up going to one, and I met a ton of people, and everyone that was there was really warm and inviting. So I imagine that if I decided to stay there long term, I could pretty quickly meet people and make friends. Nightlife in Mendoza. As I've already mentioned several times, the street Aristides Villanueva is the place for going out. It is full of restaurants, cafes, bars, everything. And during the day, it's pretty common that people are there, the music is playing. At night, this place explodes. There's music coming from everywhere, including like the kioscos and the convenience stores. It's on fire. There's so many people walking down the street. It's packed. Another place that people like to go to at night is on Juan B. Justo. There are a bunch of bars and restaurants with more affordable prices. And then there's also Paseo La Alameda, which is another place that people like to go out because the food is pretty affordable and it's a pretty social place. Our next city is Bariloche. So we're going south. Bariloche is in the north of the Patagonia region. The consistent population of the people living in Bariloche is around 100,000, so it's definitely not a big city, although it was a lot bigger than I expected it. I thought it would be a bit more of like a mountain town, but it definitely felt a lot more like a tourist ski village. Everything was full of restaurants, cafes, bars, but tons of hotels, car rental places, accommodation places. It feels very, very touristy. In most places in Argentina, I felt like I could blend in fairly well. In Bariloche, I felt like almost everyone I saw was a tourist, both Argentinian tourists and foreign tourists. Bariloche has two high seasons, the winter and the summer. It's really popular for skiing in the winter and really popular for hiking in the summer. So because of that, they do have pretty good transportation around the city and the surrounding areas just because so many people are there to do outdoor activities. The good thing about the transportation in Bariloche too, the easier thing, is that you use the same SUBE card as you do in Mendoza and Buenos Aires. For housing in Bariloche, I found it really easy to find housing because there's so many options, but I also found it to be very expensive. This is one of the most expensive regions that I went to in all of Argentina, and I think just the more south you go in Argentina, the more expensive it is. And because it's such a tourist place, it's so centered around tourism, there are a ton of hotels and restaurants that are pretty expensive. You can find more affordable hostels, but if you want something private, you're definitely gonna have to pay for it. I was staying in private places and was paying around 8,000 pesos per night, which compared to the north is so expensive. I never paid more than 5,000 pesos in the north for something nice. It seems to me that the people staying in the center of Bariloche are tourists, and it seems that the people who actually live there stay in the neighborhoods outside of the city center. So if you're thinking of staying possibly in Bariloche long term, I would suggest staying a bit outside of the city. You can probably get better deals. So the general prices in Bariloche are pretty expensive. It was pretty hard going there after Mendoza and other places in Argentina. I just had to come to terms with the fact that I'm gonna be spending a lot more money down here. Food was a lot more expensive, transportation was more expensive, pretty much anything you do is more expensive in Bariloche. So if you're looking to save money and having a budget travel or a cheaper place to live, Bariloche is not that. In regards to the social life, I did find that Bariloche was a pretty social place, and I think that's probably because of the tourism. The people working in the city center are working in hospitality, working at bars and restaurants, so they're very friendly. And then the majority of the people that you're meeting are also on holiday or traveling, so they're much more open to meeting people. I would say I made the most friends and met the most people traveling in Bariloche than I did in any other part of Argentina. Even though Bariloche is like a pretty touristy, transient place, they do have a pretty active nightlife. There's tons of great craft beer bars, there's good restaurants, bars, it's very social. One of the most social places that I noticed was a place called Manouche. Good beer, good food, good environment. The last city on our list is Salta, up north. Salta is one of the most northern provinces in all of Argentina. It even shares a border with Chile, Paraguay, and Bolivia. So the city of Salta is the capital of the Salta province, with a population of about 720,000. So you definitely notice the difference in population between Salta and the rest of the other cities. The feeling of Salta was definitely that it felt like an older city. A lot of the buildings are older, a lot of the buildings are crumbling, a lot of the streets have holes. It doesn't have a modern feel at all. It feels older, it feels just a little bit more falling down. That said, I still really liked Salta. The city is easily walkable. You can get from one side to the other with no problem. There's nature. You can take the teleférico up to the top, or you can hike up. There are a ton of things to do in Salta. You can definitely occupy yourself easily. I found the people in Salta to be super friendly and warm. In the winter months, it does get pretty cold, but definitely not as cold as the south. In the summer, it's very hot because they're more desert type climates. Like most things up north, prices are so much more affordable. That includes housing, both short-term and long-term. Whether you're finding housing looking on Google Maps, Booking.com, Airbnb, anything, it's all gonna be so much more affordable than anything you'll find in the south or really the rest of the country. I spent about 5 weeks between Salta and Jujuy, and the most I ever spent per night was 5,000 pesos, which at the time was around 25 US dollars. But in general, I was paying between 2,000 to 3,000 pesos for a private room or even a private apartment, which at the time was like $7 to $10 a night. So if you're looking for long-term housing in Salta, you can easily find something super affordable, definitely less than $300 a month. For prices in general, I found Salta to be affordable. Certain services were comparable to any other city, like a gel manicure was around 2,300 pesos, same as every other city. But a shoe shine in the main plaza, for example, was like 200 pesos, which is less than $1. Food was definitely more affordable. I easily spent less than 1,000 pesos on lunch menus. You can also find empanadas in the street for 50 pesos each. And speaking of food, the food in Salta is some of the best. I personally think that a lot of food in Argentina is kind of bland. They don't use a lot of spice, but in the north, they use a lot of spice, and I love it so much. It gives the food so much more flavor. There's something called ají picante, which is a spicy sauce. They use it everywhere. Love it, obsessed. And the traditional foods in Salta are really different from the rest of the country. They have humitas and tamales. The empanadas are generally fried instead of baked, and they tend to be a bit smaller. Up north, they also have something called tortilla, which is just imagine like a Mexican quesadilla. It kind of looks like that, but with different fillings. So good. I didn't find much international variety up north, but there was a lot of variety within the northern type of food. Although, I'll be honest, I did start getting pretty sick of eating llama and eating stews and empanadas all the time, and I wanted something different after a few weeks. So the social life in Salta. I tried to join the Facebook group for Salta, and my membership was never accepted, which makes me think that the group is kind of a ghost town and it's not really active. There probably are foreigners living in Salta. I didn't really see a lot, or at least that I knew of, but I did find the locals to be super fun and engaging and friendly and open, and I found it pretty easy to make friends with local salteños. The nightlife in Salta is so good. One thing I love about the northern provinces like Salta and Jujuy is that they have something called a peña. A peña is a place where you can go and have drinks or dinner, but they have live folkloric music. Sometimes it's more casual, like spontaneous, and sometimes it's planned. But when you go to a peña, the ambiance is so good, like people playing live music, talking to each other. It's really easy to meet people. It's a great environment, and I just love hearing the live folkloric music there. One of the most popular peñas in Salta is a place called La Casa del Molino, and if you want to find more information about that or other places in the north, just click again on my blog post listed below, because I have a ton of information. I hope this guide was helpful for you trying to decide where to travel or where to potentially live in Argentina. After spending the entire year last year in Argentina, I have a ton of Argentina videos. So click on this playlist and you're guaranteed to find something else that's helpful for you. Why not?